Okay, great. Hello and welcome to the House Progressive Caucus. It is February 13th, 2024. And today we have a number of guests and a little bit of caucus logistical topics to go over before we get into our topic today, which will be covering a few different environmental bills, but specifically the renewable energy standard. So what we'd like to do in this caucus before we get into it is to go around and do introductions. And so if you could share your name, your pronouns if you choose to, your organization affiliation if you have one that you're here today for, just briefly. And then I'll go into some caucus updates, and we have some guests related to the Vermont State College trustee vote today too. So with that, I'm Representative Emma Mulvaney-Stanek. I'm the House Progressive Caucus leader. I represent a portion of Burlington, and I use she, her pronouns. And I always go to my left.
Thank you. Representative Troy Hedrick, use he and him pronouns. I also represent a portion of Burlington, a different portion of Burlington. I serve on the House Corrections and Institutions Committee.
I am Rob Kidd with the Vermont Sierra Club. I'm the Conservation Program Manager, mostly working on transportation issues and climate.
I'm John Groveman. I'm the Policy and Water Program Director for the Vermont Natural Resources Council. I use he, him pronouns, and I work on a lot of things, but Act 250 is one of them.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Representative Lynn Dickinson. I represent most of St. Albans town, and I am here as a legislative trustee.
I'm Mark Mahaly. I'm Callis, Plainfield, Marshfield, he, him, and I'm on the House Appropriations Committee.
I'm Ed Stanek from Barry, here representing DUMP, the citizen grassroots group from the Northeast Kingdom, and my pronouns are he and him.
Ben Edgley Walsh, Climate Program Director of the Vermont Public Interest Research Group, from Winooski, he, him.
Representative Kate Logan from Chittenden 16 District, and I serve on the House Committee on Environment and Energy.
And I'm Josh Rodsky. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Progressive Party, again by he, him, and I'm offering staff support to our Progressive House Caucus.
Thanks, Josh. We'll finish out the room and then we'll go online.
Good afternoon, everyone. Representative Taylor Small, she and her pronouns from Winooski. I'm happy to have you here. And also the Assistant Caucus Leader.
Great. And then let's go online just briefly. If folks want to introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Vanessa Rule. I use she, her pronouns. I am the lead organizer and co-director of 350 Vermont.
Thanks for being here. And Eva, are you on? You want to introduce yourself?
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Oh, hi, I'm Eva. I'm the member organizer for the Vermont Progressive Party.
Thanks, Eva. Sorry, get your name wrong. It's so great to have you here. And thanks, everyone. So very quickly, just some House leadership updates, and then we'll go to the candidates for the Vermont State College trustee positions. We have a joint assembly later this week. Just very briefly, the floor schedule is staying the same this week, most likely also next week. And so as we get closer to town meeting, just prepare for the floor schedule to start to change. We have a joint assembly on Thursday at 10:30 a.m. Right now, we have two known candidates who will speak in just a moment for those positions, as well as one candidate for the adjunct general position that we'll be voting on. It's in a joint assembly with the Senate. The official crossover dates are now set. They're March 15th for policy bills and March 22nd for money bills. And also just flagging tentatively H850 is likely to go to, did we do that today already? No, that's tomorrow. Tomorrow is a bill in Ways and Means that will, there'll be a motion to move it through all stages of passage to move that bill forward. It's related to, again, education spending. So if folks have questions on that, we can maybe take those up at the end since we have a lot of guests today. And I think those are all the House leadership notes from the week. Okay, for the week. Great. So briefly, I'd like to just welcome our two candidates for the Vermont State College trustee positions, which are appointed by the legislature. And I've asked them each just to say about a minute or so about why you're either running for re-election or for election. And then if members have any questions, we can briefly ask those. So I'll let Lynn go first. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Emma. My name is Lynn Dickinson. I'm a representative from St. Albans town. I've been involved in educational issues on the board of BFA and way back many years ago, trying to bring CCV to Franklin County in a variety of other capacities, working with school boards and school issues. I am running for reelection. I was elected 12 years ago with Bill Lippert at the time, who was no longer in the legislature, and we served as the two of the four legislative trustees. And I'm currently chair of the board. I've served on all the committees. I've been very actively involved in this effort at the Vermont State College system. This is a system that educates Vermonters for Vermont jobs. These are people who want to stay here, who are often first generation, and who are really the people who we need to go and help become better educated, more skilled, to get the certificates and to be able to go and earn a better living and to be able to work for the services that we provide in the state of Vermont, whether it's employers, private industry, nonprofits, whatever, the trades. And that's what the Vermont State College system does. It educates those students, and it educates them for Vermont jobs. We have students of all ages, high school students right up to senior citizens. We have non-traditional students. We have part-time students, and they really are looking to, again, improve their skills and be able to serve their neighbors and improve the situation for their families by upskilling their skills and their education. This is something that came to a head about 4 years ago when the then chancellor, after COVID, with the financial realities of the schools being, the system being almost bankrupt, really, and wanted to close some campuses. And we created a select group in the legislature made up of stakeholders, including legislators and other people from higher education. And it was called the Select Group for the Future of Higher Education. And they came up with suggestions, and we've been in the process of implementing those suggestions that were outlined in the Statute Act 74 at the time. So we, among other things, are trying to get rid of our structural deficit, which is requiring 5 years of $5 million a year to $25 million. And we're about halfway through that. And we are
more minutes, just or a couple more seconds, if you would.
And I just want to say that work continues. There's been a lot of new things that have happened as a result of that. We've created Vermont State University out of our legacy campuses, residential campuses, and there's still a lot of work left to be done, but I would like to continue to serve, and I ask for your support. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. And as an incumbent, there's lots to say, I'm sure, so I appreciate that. So, and Mark, we'll give you about 2 minutes too, just to be fair too. Not that I don't think there's any other competition, but I want to give you the same amount of time.
Well, she said a lot of it. Mark Mahaly. So I'm on the House Appropriations Committee. I was dean of the law school at a really tough time. We had to do a lot of cuts. I've learned it's important to cut, but it's also important to grow. You can't cut your way out of a crisis. I mean, it's got to be a combination of the two. Right now is a really important time for the colleges. And I think it's going to need a board that's an activist board, a board that is actually scrutinizing their budget very carefully, looking for opportunities. This is going to be a really difficult transition. And it's what we absolutely have to succeed. We cannot let the colleges go downhill. We just can't. They're too important for Vermonters. I'm assigned to colleges on the House Appropriations Committee. And we really worked and saved the 802 Opportunity Program, which gives them, anybody who's earned 75K or less can go for free. It's incredibly efficient, great program. It was federally funded. It was about to end last year. And we saved it in the House, thank God. And it's growing. So we can't let them fail, but we can't just write checks. So I think that our role is to translate the colleges to you guys, because you're the funders. And your constituents go there. And we also have to go the other way, which is to make clear to the board and the administration what the priorities of the assembly are. So I'd like your support, despite the fact that I've been told that I'm an idiot for running. I'm doing it. I want to do it.
Great. Thank you, Mark. All right, members of the caucus, are there any questions for our two candidates at all?
Thank you both for stepping up.
Thank you. If you have any questions, just let us know. We'd be happy to talk to you about
You
it.
will have questions.
Actually, I do want to flag it because we don't have a lot of time, but I am going to flag, I do have two questions. And one is related to having met off session with a couple of Castleton University students
Right.
who are, you might be familiar with this, hopefully you are, and if not, we'll have some conversation. But just to flag it for everyone around some concerns around racism that has happened on campus and lack of response by administration to really support those students, and then some attempts to even engage the board and not a lot of response, if any. So I just want to go back and find those notes from that meeting and just to make sure that's at least on your radar, but also just hearing how students are a piece of that around inclusive campuses. And then the second piece, just as a legislator who always looks at these legislative appointment roles, would be at UVM, or these roles around labor and how the staff are treated, especially when there are cuts and program changes. So wanting to make sure that at least I have a little bit of understanding of just how you view state employees who are part of making these colleges operate and run, and just the framework for which you make those decisions when those tough decisions you're both talking about come up. What about the Vermonters and those jobs which are critical, especially in certain regions of our state? So I'll follow up.
Okay.
About that, if that's all right.
I've heard from labor,
Mhm.
but I haven't heard, and I know about the vote of no confidence, which is a wake-up call.
Mhm.
I haven't, the racism thing you're talking
I've heard
about.
about that.
Okay,
Yeah.
I haven't, so we should.
And I will definitely follow up. Yeah.
Right.
Thank you both so much for
Okay.
being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Emma. Thank
Okay.
you very much.
Thank you. All right, members, moving right along. Before we go into our guest panels, are there any bills that members from your committees want to flag, since this is our public caucus, for the sake of folks knowing or coming to the floor this week? For those folks watching at home. There's nothing coming out of House Commerce this week, but there is that big consumer data privacy bill I was mentioning will move its way through the process soon enough, and that will be a big one. I'll walk people through when we get there. But anything in your committees?
Nothing coming out of committee this week. I would imagine maybe as early as next week, I'll have some more details on a few policy bills that we're looking at.
Okay, great. Thanks, Troy.
Same, we're in the middle of Act 250 and H 687 in committee, but we'll be talking about H 289 that left my committee.
Yep. Okay, thanks, Kate. Taylor? Just nothing going on in human service? I'm just
Well, we're
joking.
solving
Oh,
homelessness.
You're solving homelessness, okay. More to come. Josh,
Yeah, I
yeah.
just want to flag, I just sent you all bills that are up for markup and or vote in committee this week. So let me know if that works well as a format.
Great. We'll take a look at that.
Emma.
Thank you. Oh, hi, Brian.
Emma,
Yep.
hi, there's 3 healthcare bills I think we're gonna see on the floor this week. And the interstate licensure compact for occupational therapists and social workers, and a peer support and recovery specialist professional regulation bill. I think that those 3 are gonna come across the floor this week.
Great. Thanks for the heads up. Representative China's online, a member from Burlington. Thanks for letting us know, Brian. Okay, well, on that note,
You're welcome.
I'm going to pass this over to Representative Logan, who's going to introduce our guest and help walk us through some briefer updates, but then spend a little bit more of our time on the renewable energy standard. And for our guests, just to know, we have to hike back up the hill over to the building. So we'll need to wrap up around 12:50 or so. Okay. Thanks, Kate.
Thanks. Thank you all for being here. There is a lot of environmental legislation being contemplated this year. I would love to have another day with the Progressive Caucus this session to talk about in more detail land use related things, development, planning, flood recovery and resiliency, and waste management on another day. But I thought I would at least give the caucus an opportunity to hear updates on legislation that's moving around those matters, plus transportation, and a big climate funding bill. So we have John Groveman here to talk about Act 250 from BNRC, and Rob Kidd from Sierra Club to talk about transportation. And then we have a member of the Stanek family, Ed Stanek, here from.
There's only 3 of us in the state.
Yeah. From Don't Undermine I'm just going to say Magog's Purity, Dump, to talk about H48, our wastewater bill. Just quick updates on those. Ben Walsh will also provide, from BPERG will also provide an update on the Climate Superfund. And then we're going to dig into H289. So hopefully we'll have, 20, 30 minutes to talk about H289. And also we have Vanessa Rule here from 350 Vermont to talk about H289 along with Ben. So why don't you all go ahead and give us a update on what you see going on this session that'll be coming along that we should be paying attention to as progressives.
Do you want me to help with timing? Just to,
Sure, that'd
yeah,
be great.
maybe 2 minutes?
Yeah, 2 or 3 minutes.
And then I will politely give you a wave at 2 minutes, just so y'all can share the time.
Okay, I'll go first then. Okay, so I'm Rob Kidd with the Sierra Club, and I've been working on transportation very much, focused on it for probably about the last 5-6 years. And you all used to have a progressive caucus member on the Transportation Committee, Molly Burke, who actually the Sierra Club just gave an award this last year, because the transportation discussion didn't really evolve around climate issues beforehand. And Molly came in there completely on her own. And it wasn't until there was more favorable allies on the committee where we were able to make a lot of progress. However, the Transportation Committee covers a lot of budget issues, so it doesn't get into the transportation policy issues as much. So they focus a lot on time looking at the nuances of the budget. And that's where I wanted to flag the biggest concern is basically the transportation budget is $870 something million this year. It's a record high. So when the governor says he wants to trim things, he's always pushing money toward paving, more towards bridges and roads. The paving budget is like over $110 million. But when we look at public transit, it's about $49 million. Look at bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, it's about $12 million. There's some extra other funds that are going towards those that we want to see moving forward, particularly there was from the carbon reduction strategy, there's an additional $3 million towards what we call the MTI, Mobility Transportation Innovation Grants that's being proposed. There's some an additional $4 million going to bike and pedestrian infrastructure from that grant program. But there's a lot more that we need to get done. And the administration doesn't really want to take it to a level of like how we're going to solve this. So there's this a possible study that's going to happen facilitated by the Treasurer's Office that's going to look at all these different funding options so we can sustainably fund the programs. So
And is that going to be in the budget or?
hopefully in the transportation bill. And then one other thing, just for one of your progressive caucus members in the Senate, is introduce a right to charge bill that may, so if you have a relationship with Keisha Ram, talk to her about getting that bill attached so people can access charging facilities. So that's my shortened version.
Yeah, if there's questions at the end, but that's just so we can hear everyone's overview.
Act 250 or?
What's your pleasure? You tell us. What do you want? What would you like to hear?
Why don't we do landfill, Coventry landfill first, then move into Act 250. They're related.
Thank you. So very briefly, I became involved with the group known as Dump back in 2018 because of profound issues regarding the operation of that landfill. I want to say up front that clearly the General Assembly has no authority over the operating landfill. It's in the bailiwick of the executive branch, runs the regulatory process, and the judicial branch to which various appeals are going on. But having said that, during the course of the work by Dump over the last 6 or 7 years now, they became very familiar with the state policy on solid waste, which was enacted in 1987. It's 35 years old. And as a result of the work, it's been pretty clear that the policy is woefully inadequate now and really should be revisited. For example, Vermont right now is facing serious threats due to the importation of solid waste from other states. There aren't many landfills in states, and landfill up in Coventry now, 20 to 25% of what's going in there is coming from other states. And it's not just household garbage. It's sludge, contaminants going in there. It's contaminated soils. So these are significant issues of the future for Vermont with importation of waste. In addition to that, there are serious leachate issues, treatment of leachate. And PFAS is now on everyone's radar, was not on anyone's radar 37 years ago. So long story short is H48 was introduced over a year ago. A good faith effort to move things along. But again, cutting to the chase in the interest of time, it's our hope that H48 could be transformed into a study committee, which would revisit the policy during the summer and fall and report back to the General Assembly with recommendations on upgrading the state solid waste policy for the 21st century. One last comment, boy, the General Assembly passed great legislation a couple of years ago on environmental justice, but in all sincerity, what's going on in the Northeast Kingdom is the poster child for environmental injustice. That region of the state has always been economically depressed. There are Native people that live up there. It's an international issue too, because of the presence of Lake Memphremagog. So again, long story short, hopefully H48 will be transformed by the House Environment and Energy Committee, and we seek the support of the progressives in the effort when and if the bill gets to the floor to create a study committee. Thanks.
Thank you. Very close to 2 minutes. Well done. Not biased, just being clear.
That's not fair. That's not fair, but. Fair, so.
Life is not
Not fair.
fair. Yeah.
So Act 250, so last year, if you all recall, in the housing bill that passed, there was some interim exemptions put in to encourage more housing in and around our downtown areas. And there was a big debate about how far those exemptions should go, because we want to encourage dense housing. We don't want to encourage sprawled out single family housing that's not affordable. So I think there was a general agreement on the exemptions with the understanding that the Natural Resources Board that oversees Act 250 was going to finish a study that recommended some holistic changes to Act 250, which would include both sort of permanent areas where there would be Act 250 wouldn't apply because there would be zoning and other sideboards in place. And that is where we could really concentrate and try to build some housing, build affordable multifamily housing to try to deal with the housing crisis, but also deal with the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis, and recognize that Act 250 has not done a great job in dealing with impacts to habitat and important and other critical natural resources. So the Natural Resources Board actually came back with a recommendation. VNRC was part of a steering committee that included affordable housing developers and included regional planners, local planners, the Chamber of Commerce, large home builders, small home builders, and came up with a recommendation for this kind of balanced approach. Through planning, really identifying areas where if you met certain criteria, you could have these mapped areas in and around our downtowns, but an area around them to try to meet some of our housing needs, excluding river corridors and flood areas, because obviously we know we don't want to be building more anything in those areas based on the floods that we saw this summer and we've seen over the last 10 years. And so that report is being considered by the House as it goes through a bill that Representative Sheldon introduced that doesn't exactly sync up with those recommendations, but what I've seen her doing, and Representative Logan could speak to because she's been there every day, is kind of going through Representative Sheldon's bill, looking at the NRB report, taking a lot of testimony and trying to drive to some bill that implements that vision that I mentioned of where we're going to build housing, where do we have duplication, and with good planning, not have to apply Act 250, but also adjust Act 250 to protect these critical resources and help us deal with climate change. The Senate Economic Development Committee is doing its own bill, and the Senate Natural Resources Committee is doing its own bill. So I've been like a pinball bouncing around with my colleagues to each of these committees. The bills are all different slightly, but the theme I think everyone is working off is the theme that I mentioned, is trying to get to this point. Don't know where we're going to get. I definitely think you need to keep checking in on this, because I don't think the committee just seems to be getting its legs. You're not quite like marking up a bill yet. Is that right?
We're still building a bill.
Yeah, you're building the bill. So I think it's really important to,
And there are 3 bills being
Yeah.
built.
Yeah. 2 in the Senate.
2 in the Senate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
so I think you should check in on this. Hopefully as we get closer to crossover, the bill, I mean, they're going to markup will start soon, but I think our hope at VNRC is this all will begin to come together and we'll get a clearer picture. governor, keeps saying at press conferences and things and kind of taking shots at this and that and the other thing, that there's not enough exemptions for Act 250 for his liking. We're really ignoring that and just kind of going ironically off the blueprint that his NRB created. It's very confusing to us because it was his Natural Resources Board that made these recommendations that he doesn't seem to be paying any attention to. And the NRB's actually been pretty good, and they have been sticking to what they actually recommended as a framework.
Mhm. Well, I do think this is, especially that there's 3 different bills. It seems like definitely another topic that we would like to bring people back in to talk more broadly about. I think it deserves some more. I already have a couple questions myself, but I think we should bring you back, John, and others to really dive more deeply into Act 250 so we can tease out what's happening in these three bills in particular. So thank you.
That was my hope, is that you all would realize how important all these issues are.
Absolutely.
And we could talk a whole half an hour about each of them probably. But we have a vote coming up on H 289. So that seemed like where we need to put our attention right now. But thank you all so much. Really look forward to, I don't get to work on the issues that you're talking about in my own committee. But I do get to work on the others, and I look forward to keeping the conversation going. And thanks for introducing those topics to us. And then we have one more bill that we want a brief update on, and Ben can provide that for us, the Climate Super Fund. And then we'll dig into H 289. And Ben, I was hoping for 289, you could give an overview of what the bill does. And anything you feel like is important to share with us that we need to know about what 289 is going to do. And then Vanessa has a few minutes of remarks prepared, and then we should have time for some questions for everybody on any topic.
And it's 12:30 now, so just want to keep in mind where we have to go and be.
Yeah, a few minutes per each here, and then discussion.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Well said, for the record, as if I was testifying. Thank you for having me. Let me just say in 1 to 2 minutes or less, a little bit on the Climate Superfund Act, which is just getting rolling in the Senate, and then I can shift to 289. So the Climate Superfund Act, H 809 in the House and S 259 in the Senate. First of all, thank you all for co-sponsoring it, the House version. This is a bill that would, apply the sort of polluter pays principle that is embodied in the Federal Superfund Act for toxic waste sites that was passed in 1980. Vermont has a version of it. Many states do, that essentially say if you create as a company a toxic waste site, it's not the people who happen to live next door that have to pay to clean it up. It's the company that profited from making the toxic waste site in the first place. Takes that model and applies it to the climate crisis, and essentially says, at this point, it's abundantly clear we have a climate crisis, that we've known that for a very long time. The largest polluters in the world from a greenhouse gas standpoint have known that for a very long time. And they should be held to a strict liability standard and required to pay their fair share for Vermont's costs to respond to and clean up from the climate crisis. So Senate Judiciary is just starting to take testimony. They took a morning last week on the sort of legal underpinnings of this approach. We believe they should be taking it up again this week, though I don't, as of a little while ago, it wasn't on their schedule. So, very optimistic this will move. We would have a few committees to go through in the Senate before it got to you all. And we do anticipate this really being a Senate first strategy, as opposed to one like you heard on climate resilience, other climate resilience bills that were like different committees and different bodies are moving at the same time. So that's that in a nutshell. Happy to answer any questions, or I can shift over to 289.
How's it going? It's going to pass.
Well, so after one morning of testimony, it's gone very well. They legitimately heard from, some very strong witnesses. John was in the chair as, former general counsel for ANR. I think that was very helpful for them to hear from. And then they also heard from Jenny Rushlow, the dean of the Vermont Law and Graduate School, and a professor from the University of Michigan who's sort of a national expert on this approach. And then ANR. So they had a very good start last Thursday. And I think generally speaking, what we're hearing from that committee is that, they believe that was a good start. But it's going to take a little while to figure out what they're going to do with it.
Okay. Yeah, and Climate Solutions Caucus, I'll be working with a few folks to do an equity analysis of that bill to think through, the named designations for the where the money's going to end up. So hoping it moves along. So thank you.
Absolutely. So shifting to 289. So this is a bill that would update Vermont renewable energy standard. Our current renewable energy standard was passed in 2015. It requires Vermont electric utilities by 2032, ramping between here and there, to get to 75% renewable electricity. 10% of that would be coming from new in-state renewables by, again, that same 2032 date. So 10% new renewables in Vermont, generally small and medium-sized ones, and then 65% from any renewable of any kind, of any size, of any, built at any time, anywhere in the region. So very sort of permissive for that other 65%. This bill came out of a multi-year push. Environmental organizations, certainly VPIRG, amongst them, pushed very hard in 2020 to move an update to the renewable energy standard, basically feeling like that was a good start, but 10% new renewables from a greenhouse gas standpoint is not nearly enough. That bill made it out of Senate Finance, installed in Senate Natural when the pandemic hit, as so many things unfortunately did. And it's been a multi-year process to sort of get that back on track. Last year, you all passed a bill requiring a working group to be stood up over the summer and fall of environmental and utility and other stakeholders, including Vermont Affordable Housing Coalition, AIB, and some others. That working group met, chaired by 4 legislators, September through the end of the year, and ultimately came up with a framework that would dramatically increase the amount of new renewable energy that requires electric utilities to get. At a very high level, this is going to quadruple the amount of new renewables that Vermont electric utilities are required to provide to Vermonters over the next 10 years. It would double the in-state requirement from 10% to 20%, mostly on that same time frame by 2032, although some utilities would have a little bit longer to get there. It would get us to 100% total renewables by 2032. Again, by 2030, with some utilities having a little bit longer to get there. And then it would also create a new requirement for new regional renewables that would be 10 to 20%, depending on which utility you're talking about. Those could be renewables in Vermont. They could be renewables anywhere in New England or directly adjacent to New England. Large hydro would not count for that. New or expanded biomass would essentially not count for that. There's a very high efficiency standard that really isn't, with current technology, achievable for biomass. And so what you'd be looking at is by 2035, all utilities in Vermont would have to be 100% renewable, with 20% of that coming from small and medium-sized renewables in Vermont, and another 10 to 20% coming from new renewables anywhere in the region. To try to put those into some more concrete terms, and then I'll just make another couple of quick notes and turn it over to Vanessa. That would be about 600 megawatts more solar than is currently required under current law in Vermont over the next decade, and about twice as much, sort of twice again that much in terms of new renewables in the region. If you're trying to get a sense of like what that would look like from a greenhouse gas standpoint, that's about 150 to 250,000 cars being taken off the road from a climate standpoint. Obviously, there are a lot of other good reasons to do this, but from a climate standpoint, that's sort of a sense of scale. One critical piece of this that's really important to be clear about is it does make some modifications to the net metering program, which is how Vermonters sort of go renewable and have a direct connection to the power that's being generated other than just their utility, it would take away what's called offsite or virtual group net metering. And that's where you have one or more electric utility customers building a solar array, generally not where they're using power out in the field or a gravel pit or brownfield somewhere, and then getting bill credit for that. That is a way that some community groups, municipalities, et cetera, have built solar in Vermont when they can't do it on their own property. That's a program that VPERG supported for a very long time. It has never been as successful as we wanted it to be, and it has declined in sort of the total amount that's happening by about 80% over the last 5 years. And so from our perspective, the utilities, have been talking about for a long time the cost pressures that puts on rates. We think that's perhaps overstated, but is not entirely unfair. And so taking that off the table and working towards next session, a larger, more accessible community renewable program was worth the hundreds and hundreds of megawatts in new renewables this bill would get. The last piece I would note there is through a lot of hard work by many people, including Representative Logan, that group net metering, offsite group net metering was extended for affordable housing developers specifically through the end of next year. And then those projects could be built on into the future. So it creates a runway for affordable housing developers specifically. And then lastly, it creates a report back requiring the Department of Public Service working with stakeholders to recommend one or more successor programs to that sort of offsite group net metering to be acted on potentially by the legislature next legislative session. And that's certainly something that our organization is very interested in pressing for. And we see that, report back as a sort of jumping off point for that conversation next year. Thanks, and appreciate your patience. I know that took a minute.
Thanks. That's a really good segue. I think Vanessa will be speaking to that issue as well. So Vanessa, are you all ready to share your thoughts with us? And thanks so much, Ben. Great job.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me meet with you today and share 350 Vermont's thoughts. So I'm Vanessa Rule. I'm the lead organizer and co-director of 350 Vermont. And I'm here talking to you on behalf of the thousands of Vermonters who volunteer with and support our work. Our mission is to build a people-powered and people-led climate justice movement for a just and thriving world. So we're not just talking about reducing carbon emissions, but how we get there so that everybody benefits from this transition. I would like to talk to you a little bit about the context for H289. Why are we doing this? Why is it important right now? And how does it work as one step to address one of the biggest crises that humans have ever faced? I think I just want to make clear that H289 cannot be the end of action in the electricity sector. And so our takeaway is that we support H289. We need to increase the goals, but we need your commitment and understanding that alone it's not going to make enough of a difference. We need to make sure community solar is protected down the road, that there's ratepayer protection, and that we also support other technologies like thermal energy networks that are going to make it easier to reach our goals. This fall, we held 11 events across the state to educate Vermonters about where electricity currently comes from. People were outraged and shocked to find out that the majority of our so-called renewable electricity does little to reduce carbon pollution. At the end of the presentations, attendees often expressed anger at the current system and a feeling of inspiration to change it. So they're very supportive of revising and passing the renewable energy standard, which would increase low emissions renewables from 10% by 2032 to 40% by 2035. And we also want to say that that's not enough. And one of the key takeaways here is that this is just one step, and we're going to need to come back to this next year. I want to stop for a second and address the number 350. I was surprised when I testified in the House Energy and Environment Committee to realize that most people don't know what that means. When I started advocating for people to act on climate in 2007, my kids were 3 and 6 years old. And I learned at the time that the maximum safe amount of carbon emissions in the atmosphere is 350 parts per million. Hence 350.org, 350 Vermont. Do you know at what level of parts per million human life on Earth evolved? Any of you in this room right now, besides Ben? 270 parts per million. Today we're at 420 parts per million. That's 20% higher than the maximum safe level and rising faster than ever. So the heat we're feeling today is the result of emissions that were released 30 years ago. With what's in the atmosphere now, plus all we continue to add year after year, warming will continue to accelerate. And the Vermont our children will inherit will look nothing like where we live today. What will the storms, droughts, and wildfires look like in Vermont 5 to 10 years from now? And what happens if we don't do enough to stop this? So we know later is too late, and now is the time. So it's really, really critical that we throw everything we have behind this bill. At the same time, 40% by 2035 is not enough. And I realize that we're talking about H289 and passing it this year. But we need to build political momentum beyond this. And you're all critical in that effort. And I think it's important for you to understand that. So I'm going to speak to that. The good news is that we need to get 100% low emissions electricity as quickly as possible. And that's feasible. So the first thing that we need to do is to be honest about how much this bill will actually reduce emissions. Renewable energy is not necessarily low emissions. The claim is that this bill gets us from 75 to 100% renewable energy. Technically, that's true based on how we define renewable energy. But the reality is the majority of what's renewable energy in this bill does not reduce carbon emissions as we need it to do. And so we know that, large hydropower, the use of unbundled renewable energy credits, biomass, renewable natural gas emit significant greenhouse gas emissions, and that they have no place as solutions in a bill whose purpose is to address the climate crisis. So that is going to need to be fixed, if not this session, the next one. Our second ask is, down the road to really get to way beyond 40% by 2035. We need to get up to 100% as quickly as possible. And we don't think that can happen without the participation of Vermonters. The people that we talk to are very opposed to the utilities owning all the production of our electricity. And we know that one of the biggest challenges in Vermont to low emissions renewable energy like solar and wind is people pushing back around siting. We firmly believe that we are much more likely to reach our goals if Vermonters are active participants. And that means that if we eliminate offsite group net metering in this bill, we need to come up with an alternative really, really quickly. We would much prefer that we left offsite group net metering in this standard until there's a viable alternative. We understand that the current system isn't working well, that we need something that works much better, but we really need to update that.
Thanks. And Vanessa, just so you know, we have about 2 minutes until we have to wrap up and get back to the State House.
Okay. Thanks for letting me speak.
Yeah. Okay, so we have 2-3 minutes where we can ask questions. I'll just say I pushed really hard to make sure that there was a replacement in place for offsite group net metering before the program ended, and we couldn't get there in our committee. So the legislature will have to take action next year to put a replacement program for offsite group net metering. A lot of people are referring to it as community solar. There are a lot of ways to do community solar. It may end up having to be offsite group net metering. Like that might be what we come back with in the report next year, that there's no other alternative. But the legislature is going to have to take action, or else that that option will end for affordable housers next year, and it will end for normal consumers, including businesses, municipalities, et cetera, at the end of this year. So that's a big piece. And then I think Vanessa's other point is well taken. We need additional legislation. We have to pass ratepayer. We have to talk about thermal. We have to talk about procurement programs in general, about like what energy we're putting in place. But with just like a last minute, does anybody have any questions, burning questions for the folks that are here? And you can obviously follow up with Vanessa and Ben.
I guess one general question I have about recognizing not everyone in Vermont lives the same way, as a representative from Burlington, of course, right, is around how, and especially we're trying to make housing even denser in large communities, is what options do residents have to really be part of accessing renewables and being able to benefit how people living more rurally can do that, especially with the some of these community renewable. This is not my policy area. So these things sort of being shifted. I mean, there's a reality that there's a lot of people who live in Burlington and Winooski and places, and so
we don't have access.
Do we have?
Well, that's
Right.
why.
Yeah,
That's why the offsite group net metering or an alternative is critical, because that's the only way renters and people who can't build their solar panels on their roofs or on their
like my old house. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Okay.
That's why it's so critical.
And there are some people who will never be able to site solar on their property because it would be too expensive to cut down a tree because they don't have, $30,000 to invest in their property to get it ready for solar panels. So we need options for those folks that are off site. And that's going to be something we spend a lot of time talking about next year, according to this bill. And then hopefully making a decision on. But it is 12:50. Do we want to wrap up and get back? Okay. Yes. Great. Thank you all so much for being here. Sorry, Rob.
Just make one quick comment.
That's
With the Sierra Club, we were involved with that working group. I actually got Chris Pearson, former representative senator of your caucus, to represent us because it's past my level expertise, and he was thrilled of how much progress we were able to make with that.
Yeah.
So you speak on that within your values. Chris Pearson would be somebody very helpful for you to speak with.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. And thank you all for being here. There's so much going on with environmental and climate legislation this year that's really exciting. And I look forward to coming back and talking more about.
So thanks for the opportunity, and
Thank
it'd be great before things get to the floor and people have questions about what the heck it is.
I know who to talk to too. Thank you so much, Vanessa.
Vanessa, for being online.
Bye. Thank you.
Courtney, thank you. And we can go offline. Thank you.